Hi and welcome to my OCR A-Level Biology revision with me, Christine. So today's lesson I'm going to look at insect exchange system, and that's part of your module 3. So insects are really fascinating individuals in the fact that they have a tough exoskeleton. Now, this means there's very little or no gaseous exchange able to occur here. They do not have a blood pigment like us. They don't have hemoglobin, so they can't transport oxygen in their transport system. So they have to have a really unique way in which they can deliver the oxygen directly to the cells and remove carbon dioxide. Now remember, oxygen is necessary for the respiration, aerobic respiration. Carbon dioxide is a waste product that is produced through the process of respiration. So they need to deliver the oxygen and remove the carbon dioxide. So their exchange system has been adapted to make it as efficient as it possibly can be. So we're going to start with all the way along the abdomen and thorax. We will find these spiracles. Now the spiracles are basically openings that run all the way down that side of the insect's body. Now those spiracles are normally opened, or they can be closed, and they're closed by sphincters. And those sphincters, when they close, that's going to help to prevent water loss. Now remember that when you have a gas, that gas will diffuse from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So we obviously want the oxygen to diffuse in through the spiracles. We want the carbon dioxide to diffuse out. Well, if there's any water vapor and there is a concentration gradient, that water vapor is going to diffuse from that high concentration to that low concentration. So if we kept the spiracles opened, that would result in any water which has evaporated being lost. So these spiracles can be closed by these sphincters to prevent that water loss. Now, the other thing to know is that the sphincters can actually be used to cause the opening and closing of the spiracles if they do what's called a fluttering sensation. So if they are opening and closing really quickly, what that can do is that can actually help to increase the ventilation of the gases in and out through the exchange system. So after we go through the spiracles, the air will travel down through the trachea. So the trachea are these air-filled branch tubes. Now, the fact that they're branched is going to increase the surface area. Now, like we have in our trachea, we have cartilage rings which keep our trachea open. The insects have trachea with chitinous rings, and these chitinous rings are a way to ensure that the openings, these tubes, remain open. So if there's any type of squashing occurring, they will push back against that and therefore make sure that these tubes are remained open. Now, as we move down towards the end of the trachea, we get more branching. Now, these are called the tracheoles. So the tracheoles are these minute elongated cells which form really long tubes that will run between individual cells. Now, because we have many of them, that's going to increase the surface area. And also these cells, these tracheoles, are freely permeable. So this is where the maximum amount of gas exchange occurs. In your trachea, because of the chitinous rings, that actually prevents gaseous exchange occurring at that point. So the chitinous rings stops the gas exchange, although there is some gas exchange, there's not much occurring at the trachea. At the tracheoles, however, that is where it is freely permeable. And because these elongated cells run between individual cells, that gaseous exchange, the oxygen diffusing into the individual cells, and the waste product carbon dioxide diffusing out of those cells into the tracheoles. So the maximum amount of gas exchange happens at your tracheoles. However, what we have to note is towards the end of the tracheoles, there is normally what's known as a tracheal fluid. Now remember, I talked about the fact that the water vapor can be lost. So if there is a lot of heat, if there is a high enough temperature that would cause evaporation of the tracheal fluid, that would turn that into a gaseous state, and that could then diffuse out. So towards the end of the tracheoles, to prevent dehydration of the cells, there is a tracheal fluid. However, a fluid is obviously going to limit the penetration of air for diffusion. So the fact that the tracheoles go in between individual cells maximizes that surface area for diffusion to occur, but this fluid that is present will actually divert the gases to only the areas where they can diffuse. Now, if their insect is very active and has high metabolic activity, what they actually do is they produce a lactic acid. Now, lactic acid will cause the water to move out of the tracheoles by osmosis. And what that will do is that will actually expose more surface area. So remember, the tracheoles are elongated cells. If there is this high metabolic activity, that lactic acid causes that tracheal fluid, that water, to move out of the tracheoles by osmosis. That's going to increase the surface area for those gases to be exchanged. Now, if we're looking at large insects, things like wasps, bees, beetles, grasshoppers, locusts, they have a very high energy demand. So what they need to do is they need to increase the ventilation through their tracheal system. And they can do that through either what's known as mechanical ventilation, where it is muscular pumping of their thorax or their abdomen. Now what that will do is that will change the volume and therefore change the pressure. So like us, when we use our ventilation of our lungs, we lift our rib cage up and out. That changes the volume, increasing the volume and therefore decreasing the pressure, allowing air to flood in. Well, they do this muscular pumping again to change the volume. If they increase the volume, that's going to decrease the pressure. That's going to allow more air to flood in to their tracheal system. So it is a way in which they can ventilate more, getting more oxygen in and removing more carbon dioxide. Or what they might have is they might have a collapsible enlarged trachea. So they basically have an air sac, and that air sac keeps a reservoir of air inside it. So when they're flying, if they collapse that air sac collapsing will then push this reservoir of air through the tracheal system, which will supply the oxygen necessary for respiration to meet that metabolic demand so that they can do that flying. So the tracheal system inside the insects is really specific to maximize that gaseous exchange. So I hope you've liked this video, and if you have, then please do click the like button below and subscribe to my channel. Also, do check out my revision platform, www.aiqchat.com, to help you to revise.